Hello, welcome to another episode of SaaS Scaled. I'm pleased to have Curtis Barker at Rezilion. He's VP of Product Strategy, and we are happy to have him as part of this interview. Welcome, Curtis.
Thank you, Arman. Great to be with you today.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, absolutely. I live in San Francisco in the Bay Area. I'm originally from the UK. I spent a long time living and working in Southeast Asia, nearly 10 years, in Singapore and Malaysia. I'm a bit of a man of the world. I like to experience the world, and I've had great living and working opportunities in all of these places across Europe, Southeast Asia, and now the US. I've been in the US for the past 6 years, and over that time, in on those journeys, I've been, taking on a lot of different roles. I started out as an engineering. I'm an engineer graduate, and then went on to help build networks for a telecommunications company, which is what I was doing in Southeast Asia. And then I moved on to the business side of things, and started my time working as a solutions architect and then product line of business leader, before moving into product management roles. And I spent the last 8 years, 8 to 10 years in product management.
Nice, very nice. Thank you very much for the background. Can you tell us a little bit about Resilient, what the company does, what is the main problem that it's solving, so we know a little bit about the company as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been with Rezilion for the past 2.5 years. Rezilion is a Series A company that's been around for about 3.5 years. I helped with the GA, the general availability release of the initial product that's been out now for about 18 months. And the problem that we saw at Rezilion emerge was, as organizations were shifting left and accelerating the speed at which they were updating their applications and services because they wanted speed to market. And updates were happening more quickly than ever in a more kind of DevOps fashion versus an older model of developing applications where they only used to update on a 3-month cycle. So because of the frequency of updates, it was a real difficult challenge to, one, understand what your attack surface looked like, but two, then act on all of the vulnerabilities and issues that may result as part of that attack surface. So what Rezilion does is it analyzes code and keeps a dynamic inventory, what we call a dynamic software bill of materials of the code as it moves from the CI tool chain where developers are working on it into production where customers will get benefit from it, and then associates risk to it. And the key thing that you get from that is, one, we figure out, of the code that's developed, only a fraction of it is actually really matters, is risky. So we figure out which fraction is risky and then highlight that to security and development teams so that they can focus on the risk that matters most. And they can also reduce their backlog, understanding which code is unused and potentially doesn't need to be part of their build, for example. And the result of that is organizations are able to ship their code faster whilst not sacrificing security and focus their resources on the issues that are prevalent and relevant to their attack surface, not just focusing on all the risk that may be surfaced by security scanning tools that sometimes find hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. We reduced that by about 85%, so significant reduction in the amount of time and energy spent on things that don't matter.
Very interesting. So everything that starts, and cloud is not an exception. Everything that starts, it normally starts with kind of getting the basics done first, and then you add more quality around it, right? So you make it better and better and better. And I think cloud has seen that kind of path as well. And I would say most of these security related technologies and techniques that have been built, and the one that you just explained, it just is part of it. It just adds to the quality. And do you see it the same way? Do you see that, for example, these services, I don't know, I'm not expert in that particular domain, but I don't think, that was something that was available at the very beginning of, cloud 10 years ago, and or at least not as comprehensively and as intelligently, engines that looking at the code and doing all of these analysis and providing all of these insights. That's your take as well? Is it true? Or, and how do you see that, for example, it's working, and it's going to continue evolving as we go?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So I've been working on cloud products for a long time, probably from the beginning of cloud security, at least. Not from the beginning of cloud, but cloud was nascent when I first started. It was, accumulatively, it was less than a $10 billion industry. It's now maybe $150 billion. It's seen an exponential rise from when I got into it back in uh, uh, I guess it would have been around 2013, 2014. Um, and you're right, at the time, there wasn't much in terms of security built into the platform. And that was recognized very early on by the cloud service providers, to be fair. They recognized that not having security built into the platform was an inhibitor to get onto the platform. So they started early on trying to build out security services because at that point, organizations, certainly larger enterprise organizations, had invested in their security toolset, and it wasn't fit for the cloud. So there was a challenge. That's where there was an inhibitor, but that created an inhibitor for the security tools as well, because as organizations were trying to move to get benefit from the cloud, these tools weren't fit for the cloud. So there was this interesting push and pull. There was the service providers like Amazon, Google, and Azure. It was mostly Amazon at that point, leading the charge in terms of pulling organizations to the cloud, and then trying to remove the obstacles by providing security services so that organizations could move there without having to sacrifice
Mhm.
their security posture. And then there was a push from the customers to their vendors to say, hey, you need to move into the cloud also. You need to come with us on this journey, so that we can continue to have a partnership. And that really kicked off a huge, I'd call it a revolution in security, where a lot of security companies, pretty much all security companies, needed to re-architect their products and services so that they could deliver to customers in the cloud.
and and again, you of course know that domain, but and some audience, some of the people listening to this podcast would know much better than I know. But what are the most, um, I would say, applicable or most common standards today for a SaaS product, SaaS application product, to go there and get certified or go through that standard, whatever is well defined, and then say, this is really the standard on the security front, or the compliancy that I have. What are those that are so commonly accepted in the cloud world today?
Yeah, I think there are cloud specific frameworks, but a lot of the regulations that companies really need to work toward are regulations that have been in place for some time,
Mhm.
and that would have been there whether cloud had been there or not. But like specifically related to the cloud, I think ISO 2701, and SOC 2.
Mm-hmm.
compliance, has really raised the bar in
Mm-hmm.
terms of your standard security posture that you get for all services delivering via the cloud. So all organizations have had to do that because their customers have demanded it, which is great, right? So things like identity and access management, endpoint management, encryption, they're all useful things that all services should be providing. And frankly, that they're the type of frameworks that have really pushed organizations to provide a better security posture, which I think is helpful broadly. But then there are industry specific frameworks and just broader frameworks that have been there for some time. We like PCI DSS in the financial industry, HIPAA for anything healthcare related, and obviously things FDA in the health industry as well has more things that are relevant to services delivered via the cloud than it probably used to before. So those frameworks have also evolved, right? And then you've got other kind of best practice frameworks like NIST, for example, that is something that a lot of CISOs out there take a look at to see how they can kind of build a security framework and iterate from that. You've also got things like Fedramp, right, which is probably a little bit more cloud specific as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is focused a little bit more on the federal industry as well. But that has implications, right? Because anyone that's working with organizations that are, federally kind of evolved organizations, government organizations, they are likely also to need to follow a lot of the FedRAMP standards to have a partnership and a relationship with those federal entities. So the implications of FedRAMP, even though it's targeted, has broader implications because there's so many businesses that work with government agencies.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah, definitely I can see that based on these well defined, categories and definitions, then it makes it, from one aspect, it makes it a little bit more difficult for application providers and SaaS application providers to really go there and just follow all of those and get educated and follow the instructions and get into that and get certified. But from another aspect, it actually helps them, because when they really just say we are certified based on these, then they don't need to case by case and customer by customer and contract by contract go and have these kind of different discussions. They can just go to that particular standard that is well accepted within that industry, within that vertical, maybe in some cases, as I hear from you, and then just compliant with that. um, and that's part of the maturity and adding quality to cloud. I think that's part of the journey.
Yeah, I would say there are pros and cons. The pros are, to your point, the maturity, the integrity, the quality is likely to be at a higher level by organizations needing to apply and build off these standards, to recognize them and actually take action in incorporating these frameworks and standards into their security posture. It does reduce. It does reduce the it, or should I say, it does create a slight barrier to entry, right? I think in the emergence of organizations moving to the cloud, there weren't as many, I think, restrictions
Hmm.
or things that they needed to take into consideration as they do now to do business. Like SOC 2, for example, um, it wasn't that long ago that SOC 2, it was kind of large enterprises that were taking notice of it, but small to medium businesses weren't as much.
Hmm.
And they could get away with, still providing their services to customers. I think it's difficult now for even a small to medium enterprise to establish themselves and have a certainly if they're in business to business, without having SOC 2 compliance at the very least, right? So I think there's the barriers have the barriers have raised, but with that, it's created better quality and better integrity and a higher standard of security. So I think there's definitely pros and cons.
Sure. No, peace of mind definitely is a big thing, and you cannot you cannot see market adoption without peace of mind for buyer. So that gives essentially it gives the buyer the peace of mind to see those standards compliances for the vendor and then say, okay, I can now trust and make sure that the security standards are there. So that's great. From adoption point of view,
Mm,
that's definitely something that helps. Now, changing gears a little bit, as you said, your background has been, in a way that you started as an engineer and then helping, even helping the on the sales side and then helping the product management, and you have been product management manager, and then now you're in charge of product strategy. Um, some people listening to this are product managers themselves, and how would you say that, for example, from your perspective, you see the role evolving? Do you see someone that excels in product strategy uh, is the same kind of personality, expertise, experience that also excels in product management, or you define these two in a kind of different way, and you think that it might be two different kind of aspects, that somebody might be really good at one and somebody else is good at the other one? Or, for example, how do you see the role of the experience you have brought to product management from the business and revenue group to help you to really see the product roadmap and the product development more aligned with the business? And without that experience, do you think you would have been as impactful as you are today, or not?
that's a great question. Well, first, I think the two are very well aligned. Product management, product strategy. Having a lot of experience in product management are great qualifications to evolving into product strategy. Um, and I think a second point there is my experiences across different realms of the business, whether it be my time as an engineer, my time as a solution architect, my time as a sales specialist. They have all been really useful in driving the level of impact I can have in a product strategy role. Because
Hmm.
in a product strategy role, you are naturally looking more holistically. You're not just looking at an efficient release cycle, picking the best features based upon what you understand of the market and your customers, and then having them manifest in a way that's going to drive business and successful outcomes and satisfaction for the market and customers, right? Which is largely the domain of what a product manager deals in. Obviously, at a very high level, there's lots more to it. Whereas with product strategy, you're thinking about that for sure, but you're also thinking about you're thinking about the partnerships that your product would need to build to be successful in the market. And what do those relationships look like over time? You're thinking about an end-to-end go-to-market strategy, and a release model and a pricing structure that fits that release model. You're thinking about different types of product strategies that will allow you to have reach to maybe different parts of the market. Like, for example, in the development world, where you've got lots of engineers and R&D and developers now starting to use more and more security tools, there's a lot more open source.
Hmm.
And that's driven, for example, product-led growth, where they're using essentially freeware
Hmm.
that has limited capability, but enough to for developers and engineers to want to use. And then there's for kind of additional capabilities, you can pay more for that. Um, so looking at strategies to basically have a higher usage and adoption that may, frankly, start cost you money initially as a company, but you've got broad adoption. But then you can start to monetize capabilities that are going to provide value to that audience. And if a great maybe analogy to that is Facebook, that lost tons of money initially before they figured out how to monetize their platform, and then made loads of money, right? Now that's very simplistic because they basically brought advertisers in and they didn't necessarily monetize the platform from their customer base. But it's a similar play. It's how do I get broad adoption, and from that adoption, there's a lot of intelligence I have on what users need, what they like, and how do I build capabilities on top of that to sell to that user base, or sell what I've got in terms of intelligence from that user base to monetize a third party product. So product strategy, you're thinking about a bunch of those aspects as well, that you're a lot more focused on a particular part of the product or a product portfolio when you're a product manager, and you haven't necessarily got as much time to look more broadly.
And now, when you look at, for example, product strategy, you look at what you do on the product in that particular company, Resilient, with regard to making the product, the SaaS applications, more secure. Also, as part of that business, you are looking at a landscape that helps you within the cloud environment to grow and just position the company to, compete better and operate better and grow better and scale better, the SaaS company. How do you see the kind of 10 years in the future will shape up with regard to those kind of, especially on the security, on the cloud, on the SaaS applications? Uh, Obviously, 10 years ago, SaaS was in a totally different kind of, maybe existence, or 20 years ago, it was non existent. And definitely, we will see the change. So it will not be like, that's it. We are kind of in a very stable situation at the moment. The grade, everything, it looks fantastic. We are not going to change anything anymore. But we are going to see some changes coming. And if you had to guess, based on the fields and domains that you are involved in, uh, what are the obvious things that you would say, definitely I would see how these things can get better, and has to get better?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something we've been seeing a lot at Rezilion. Is a significant convergence. So, to your point around what's changing, well, security is shifting left. And what I mean by that is a lot of security tools were focused on services that were running in a production environment and how to protect them, right? So as a customer of Zoom, Zoom's out there as a product. It's in the cloud, and it's being offered to customers, and you want to protect it from being attacked. And security is focused less on how people develop Zoom before it even gets you know pushed out into a production environment for people like me and you to use it, right? So giving Zoom a little bit of a plug, I know, but that's just an example. Um, so security is shifting left to figure out how we help the people that build an application reduce the attack surface. And what's happened as a result of that shift is security companies have tried to provide security services for um, uh, this new audience that is frankly focused on innovation and speed, and that's been a challenge. It's been a challenge because if you think about the nature of security, it's rigorous and it's painstaking and it's slow. And if you think about the development of modern applications, it's fast, it's automated, it's fluid in its cycles, and regularly is changing and dynamic. So the two didn't fit together. So there was this pressure to move shift left, and then this kind of push back from the people in that space that are working in that space to say, hey, this doesn't work for me because I'm used to working in a speedy, automated fashion. So I think a couple of key things that have happened is one we've seen obviously huge cloud native adoption. So you know organizations are more and more establishing their services in the cloud, and they're building those services and iterating on them very quickly, more quickly than ever before.
Mhm.
Releases of new updates to a product or service are happening multiple times a day versus where they used to be, and the security is having to meet these new this new paradigm and these new people that are developing the application and not just protecting an application in a production environment. So you've got two new things there. One new thing is a new cloud environment that's updated, very dynamic, and you've got these people, these developers, people in DevOps, DevSecOps, that are used to automation and speed. Um, so the big shift for security in the cloud is to meet those new personas where they're at, right? Give them outcomes in an automated way that doesn't reduce significantly their speed to market and gives them value at a point at which they can take action immediately versus because if they have to wait to take action even a day or a couple of days,
Mhm.
in their world, things have already moved on and they're probably working on a new project at that point. So to have to revisit an old project is very painful. So, they want to see outcomes immediately so that they can take action immediately and then move on. And I think that's the challenge of security. And at Rezilion, that's one of the things we've been focused on. We've been developing integrations directly into the software development lifecycle and the tool sets that developers use, so that as they're building applications and as they're running automated tests, they get value from the validation we do that basically reduces the amount of time that they would need to invest in working on security issues that don't matter, and then get their build through in a safe way more quickly and then move on to the next project. And that requires integration with ecosystem partners like some of the CI tool sets that developers use, and other security tool partnerships out there. And it requires us to be able to work at the speed of development as well, right? So that's been a big shift for us as an organization, but that's all in the spirit of making sure that we can shift left and work with these new personas that are having to take on a bigger load of security than ever before as they build applications, and help them do so in an automated, speedy fashion without compromising security.
And talking a little bit about the way we are the future and the path in front of us, we are getting into this augmented kind of intelligence more and more in different fields, meaning that we are using machine for part of the intelligence we apply to everything, and then we of course use and utilize you know the majority of it is still coming from human being just being involved and bring the intelligence to work. But getting into that augmented kind of intelligence environment and using more, increasingly more, machine learning, AI, to automate, to use some of these algorithms that they can learn. uh, do you, if you had to guess, do you think that that will have kind of making the security a smoother, easier, or do you think that will be on the other side actually making it more more complex and more challenging? Because you can apply on both sides. You can apply this kind of augmented kind of intelligence or machine intelligence to be more exact, right? So how do you see that can help us or hurt us in what you do based on what, for example, Rezilion does 10 years from now, that it's much more accepted and easier to utilize those kind of technologies? How do you see that can play a role in what we do, from security and analyzing what we do as a applications that we generate, the code we generate, looking at everything and coming up on the fly with some changes or alerts, or as you said, the builds are going to be faster and upgrades are going to be faster, and maybe at one point it's so fast that even human being cannot keep up with that speed and pace. And how do you see the role of ML and AI today? How do you see the role is coming in the future in that particular thing?
That's a great question, a big question. Uh, so we've seen AI and machine learning already um, insert itself into a lot of what is being done in the cloud, and as organizations build their applications. But we've seen it probably more specifically in how an existing data set is built up over time and then mined for insights, right? So I've got a lot of information that I've kept. It could be about the environment that I'm using. It could be about my customer base, and I can apply machine learning models or AI to help gain really useful insights and help establish relationships. So machine learning is being used. It's definitely providing some value to serve up insights that we 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 hadn't seen before, or at the speed at which we can get that level of information and insight now, which is great. So that's been already a significant evolution. Moving forward, is there an opportunity to continue to use machine learning and AI in terms of how we build and ship applications? I think absolutely. The technology may outpace our appetite to want to use it. Um, uh, and there's been a lot of technology that has done this over the years. Like when I think about VR goggles, you know, the technology was there before people were ready to use it, and slowly, surely, people are becoming more and more ready to use it. And there's more prevalence in the market. But if you can remember, there was a lot of fanfare around, uh, you know, VR and AR headsets and what you can do with them. But you know, we as people were not ready for that. And I still think there's an element of that to how you automate builds. You know, people are not necessarily ready to have complete automation without human intervention in these cycles. And I think there's a couple of issues there. One is that updates, for example, happen very frequently to the application, so they change a lot. You know, like I said, sometimes many times a day. So because they're changing so much, the data that you have to act on an application changes. So which impacts, for example, machine learning, which needs a consistent data lake, right? So you can't predict necessarily what change will take place. You can just go off what has happened in the past, and then that informs your model. So machine learning hasn't been that useful as we've seen up to now in helping to kind of automate and remove humans from the build process. But I think it will help to assist more and more. There will be more automation, and machine learning and AI will help with that in the future. But I don't think we're at the stage where it's providing significant value in that specific process today. But it is elsewhere. It is elsewhere as part of, you know, cloud compute. Like for example, if you look at gaming, gaming is a great example where there's sentiment analysis done. There's people are actively playing a game that will serve up, you know, specific insights to a particular gamer at a point in time based upon the measured sentiment of that player. Great, right? You couldn't do that without machine learning and an element of AI. But that's a very specific use case. I think in the build process, there's still checks and balances that a lot of organizations feel that humans should be reviewing, and there should be an audit trail, and there should be some eyes on it. But I think as we move forward and we figure out how to apply AI to the build process and the release process in a more meaningful way, then yeah, I think you can remove more of the human element, and that will allow more speed, potentially less resource having to go into the process. And I think as well, that trend of AI and ML, you've got to put that with the emergence of no code platforms, where frankly, you don't need as much kind of back end, front end development to build applications as you used to, because no code platforms, helps people that don't necessarily have a development skill set to spin up applications and bring the pieces together in a much easier and simplistic manner. And developers are already doing that with open source today, right? They're borrowing pieces of code blocks rather than building it all from scratch, and they're putting it together. You still need a lot of knowledge to do that, but no code platforms are kind of managing that for people without the computer science background. So when you look at that trend along with ML and I think what you'll get is kind of a more consistent and automated release cycle driven by AI and ML, and moving forward into the future. I don't think we're at the stage where there's a strong enough appetite to take too many people out of the process yet.
Yeah, great point. I would like to also at the end ask you if you have any book in mind that you would like to introduce. A book that has had enough impact in what you do and you would like to share with the audience.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I'd like to plug here, probably. One is the uh, Northwestern College's Product 360 framework,
Mhm.
as a view of how to look at product holistically. So looking at product strategy, and taking a look at all of the things around product strategy, marketing, support, partnerships, as well as R&D and product. So all of that, right? It's a really good framework to bring everything together, look at product holistically. So there's a framework out there, and I think it was published by Northwestern Kellogg College. So props to them. That was hugely impactful. And then also uh, uh, Google's design sprint framework for
Mm.
quickly going through um, a really kind of interactive sprint process. That's really more for product managers, but it brings R&D, product management together to quickly iterate and go through a design sprint, and um, brings together a number of key concepts that allow you to think um, really intently and openly about the problem that you're trying to solve, putting yourself in the customer's shoes, really understanding how to prioritize and visualize the experience of customers. So that's another thing that I'd recommend. So look at a design sprint on Google Ventures, and you should be able to get that framework. And then a book I'd say is Working Backwards. It's a book on basically Amazon's AWS's practices, specifically on how they kind of looked at building out their vision, thinking what their vision was, and then kind of working backwards to build that out. That was you know I think really interesting to see the vision of some of those people involved at that time as they built AWS. It's called Working Backwards. It's by Colin Bayer and Bill Carr. It's insight, stories, and secrets inside of Amazon. It was a really good book, and it gives a look at not just kind of the build process, but the culture around it. And there's really a lot of great stories in there that will, I think, relate to anyone involved in building a product, and certainly relevant as they're a huge cloud organization, any relevant to anyone building services in the cloud or services for the cloud.
Super. Great discussion and recommendations, Curtis. I appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks so much, Arman. The pleasure was mine.